come back to buy to let, because some of my followers on TikTok and maybe on YouTube or Twitter might not know this, but I'm perhaps not as super far left as maybe some people who follow me think that I am.
No, you're definitely not, and it's incredibly fucking irritating. I keep seeing your videos on my TikTok feed.
I sit sort of comfortably in the center, I think. So in some senses, I get completely befuddled and perplexed at the state of UK government, and I tend to bash the Tories quite a lot. But I always feel like that's coming from a place of logic and common sense and a thirst for integrity in public office. But in other senses, other aspects of my life,
that's what it's about. It's all about having the right people in charge, rather than saying, well, hang on a minute, maybe the system's broken, and the things that it does. I was like, well, I can deal with all of the disabled and poor people being killed by austerity, but if you go to the wrong party, or you tell a little fib in the House in the House of Parliament about a cake that you ate, that's a line that I will not cross.
Absolutely, sort of firmly centre, right? So my girlfriend is a buy-to-let investor also. I'm a big believer...
Literally in a relationship with a fucking landlord.
In self-improvement, in investing time in yourself, making a change if you're in a position to. I think where I sort of get off the bus, where I could never imagine myself voting... I mean, never say never, right? But I could never imagine myself voting Conservative, is when it becomes... It's a party sort of populated by largely silver spoon beneficiaries of nepotism, who then, when confronted with an urgency to help the most vulnerable in society, whether that's in social care or people on universal credit or state schools or hospitals, look the other way and then spaff money to donors instead. Like, that's what gets my goat. And then when I rant about that stuff, people go like, oh, he's a fucking lefty, a super turbo socialist. But actually, it's like, no, that's just unfair. If you want to talk about sort of, self-improvement and that stuff, then I'm firmly in the center. And as I said,
I mean, you can be in favor of self-improvement and be a leftist, right? Again, this is fucking stupid ass meme where people think that, well, if you say that the systems are bad, then you're just teaching people that there's no reason to try ever and we should all lie down and rot. Like any leftist has ever fucking said that. As if what we understand is that everyone should have some level of aspiration to want to contribute positively to society in a way in which can make enrich their life as much as they can, right? But A, that should not be at the expense of other people, and B, we should make it our system such that everyone gets an equal opportunity to be able to have that aspiration, right? At least in my opinion, right? And what counts as being, useful to society will differ to other people. I just think that making money regardless of the consequences is not necessarily contributing to society in the way that liberals think, right? But he is correct in saying that to think that maybe we should take care of the poor sometimes, maybe lying in Parliament is bad, and maybe a party full of public school twats who were literally inserted there by rich parents who feel like they have, a divine right to be able to be in office. Mate, that is a centrist position. I think he is correct in saying you could be a third way liberal and still think this current Conservative government is just the worst thing we've ever seen, because it's fair, they are. So I would actually agree with on that point. But like the fact that he automatically equated leftism with being not in favor of aspiration, it just shows like how few leftists he's ever actually engaged with in his life.
Like, my girlfriend is a buy-to-let investor also, and so I've sort of by proxy developed a bit of an interest in that market, and I hear some of the shit that she gets as a result of working in that arena. So
good. I hope she gets more shit.
With that very long prelude, I'm just curious, like, do you get a lot of shit for working in buy-to-let? Do you get a lot of abuse or trolls or?
I don't really talk about buy-to-let unless people ask or are interested. I didn't start doing buy-to-let on TikTok until people said, do you know anything about buy-to-let? Yeah, okay. So somebody said, if you had, I think the first video was something like, if you had £50,000, how would you invest in property?
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'd buy two £80,000 properties, £20,000 in each, and I'd use the £10,000 for the legals, the setup fees, and a bit of refurb, as in a pot of paint. It's not going to be a lot of refurb.
Sure.
It's literally just like, do you have £50,000 lying around? If you do, brilliant. You can now gouge the poor for even more money to make returns on your investment and get 2 free houses. Way!
That, in other words, you get two £80,000 properties, £160,000 worth of property for £50,000. Now, if they both got to £100,000,
no, you get them for free eventually, right?
You've now got £200,000 worth of property for 50 grand in. That's not bad. So that was it. It's a bit about leveraging and about how easy the property it is. What then follows is a range of, that's really interesting. Would you do this? What percentage you're paying? A lot of people love to go, and I don't know if they all live in the southeast, but they love to go straight to, you're a fucking idiot, where you're buying property for 80 grand. What, a shed? So 2 summers ago, that led to an enormous range of videos of, where I live, the cheapest place is £250,000. So I then send them a video of me on Rightmove with about 2,000 properties, all at £80,000 or less.
Yeah.
But some of those are in disgraceful state, and some of those are. Yeah, but that's a different argument. And I think the problem is, it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago, Aid.
There are already too many people trying to gouge the poor in London and in the southeast, right? What I do is I gouge the poor in places where property is actually affordable to make sure that no one gets the chance to own a home other than me. Hey, we're spreading the misery around everyone. I'm an equal opportunities parasite.
People want everything spoon-fed to them, and the world was never like that. So do I get a bit of hassle? Yeah, I do. It's inane, it's childlike, it's sometimes name-calling, it's sometimes really rude. So the classic one on TikTok is, you're a leech, you're a parasite, you're a problem.
Yes, you are. That's exactly what you are.
It's like, well, hang on, sorry, have we met?
Yeah.
I mean, buy me a drink first if you're going to go straight for the sexy stuff here. But there's a perception that it's okay to say to you can walk into.
I can't emphasize enough.
But you are a parasite. I mean, I understand that people are doing this to upset you, and they should, because that's correct to do so, because what you do is bad, and you should be shamed for the bad things that you do, right? But it's not necessarily an insult. It's just the truth. It's just what you are. Like, parasite, an organism that lives in or on another organism of the species, its host, and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. That's what you do. That's literally, you're just parasitic. You take, you benefit by deriving our money at our expense. Very, very simple.
How cathartic it is to hear somebody else talk about the abuse that they get on TikTok. It's
very interesting, because it's socially acceptable, it seems, in many circles to go, landlords are parasites, and with having no concept of what you're talking about, you can.
No, I do. I have plenty of concept of what I'm talking about. I just understand exactly how the buy-to-let market works, in so far as what you do is you put money into investment properties, and then you make a profit by making sure that that asset is paid off over time using the rental payments to pay the mortgage. And then once you own the property, you then get an instant supply. You get this non-ending stream of free money minus whatever taxes that you pay on that property. But even then, the taxes that you pay are only just coming out of the tenant's money in the first place regardless. The tenant pays the mortgage, the tenant pays all the bills, because if they weren't paying the bills, you wouldn't be making a profit and you wouldn't be doing it in the first place, right? So the tenant is paying for everything, and at the end of it, you get a free house that they've bought you. The only reason that they've managed to do that is because you happen to have more money than them when the property market was easy to be able to buy into. That's just the long and short of it. That's exactly how it works.
And go, oh yeah.
So let's peel the onion on this a little bit. So I'm coming at it from a left-leaning, centre-left perspective, but also one where my girlfriend has sort of schooled me on.
You sound like a class traitor to me, Aid.
Don't feed them. Don't feed them.
I mean, yes.
But it's so my take on this is that there have always been landlords. So I appreciate that.
Not in Mao's China, mate. Not in North Vietnam.
That they do against, like, a lot of people would disagree with this, but I do feel like they do perform a societal function. I think there's a lot of people, for a variety of reasons.
They do not perform a societal function. There is no need for landlords. They are middlemen. They contribute nothing. All they do is rent seek. They don't do anything that they do. The only thing they do is essentially, right, the maximum you could say a landlord does is arrange for bills to get paid and for maintenance to get done. Again, all at the expense of the tenant in the first place, right? Because that's where all the money has come from in the first place. All the money that's come from is from the tenant paying the rent, and then that rent money pays for all of the bills and all of the mortgage, mine plus any costs for maintenance as well, right? So that's all been paid by the tenant. The tenant's contributed the money, and then the landlord pockets the rest of that. They just have to go through the hassle of arranging for maintenance every month, whatever, however often that such a thing occurs that would require maintenance. That's all a landlord does. I mean, that's the property management side of it. Anything outside of that, 5 hours a month? Let's say 15 quid, 75 quid's worth of actual work that you've done as a landlord for a property, right? The rest of that is all just theft as far as I'm concerned.
Who move to towns and cities who don't actually want to buy property. They could be visiting lecturers. They could be CEOs who are actually only over here on like a fixed term contract for like 3 years or something. While
there's a need there, yeah.
Yeah. So now, admittedly,
it doesn't have to be. If you want to rent, there's no landlords are still completely irrelevant. You could have a non-profit housing association. You could have a housing cooperative. You could have, I don't know, houses owned by the state. Like, maybe councils might build them for people to live in if they couldn't really afford to buy and needed somewhere kind of cheap to rent. I can't imagine what you might call such a thing, but I've got this. That's a really good idea. I hope one of the main political parties takes that as an issue, push that forward, because that could be a really good thing that we could do to solve this housing crisis, right? Houses built by local councils. Someone give me a good snappy name for them. That might help.
A lot of those people are probably not going to be renting one-bed flats in, let's say, Camberwell in London. So there is an argument to be made that when people go into an area of high density like that, where other people are desperate to get on the ladder, and there are, let's say, 20 flats in this complex up for sale, and then all 20 get purchased by investors, and nobody gets a fucking look in to get their foot on the ladder in that first property, that one-bed flat, they all go to investors, and then if they want to live there in that area that's a stone's throw to their job, then they're fucked. But now they're paying double the amount a month than they would have done had they bought it and they'd be paying the mortgage. So do you, like, I understand the anger there. Can you sort of empathize with that also?
Well, the problem is there are multiple things here that are true, and they're all true at the same time. So there's no cognitive dissonance. This is all true, although all of this appears to contradict itself. So there will always be somebody who says exactly what you've just explained, right? All of the property goes to the landlords. All right. First of all, that doesn't always happen, right?
Oh, well, if it doesn't always happen, that completely excuses the times that it does. Oh, well, brilliant, thanks. You've solved the issue. Well, it doesn't always happen, just most of the time.
That's not always true. It's your perception that it's true. It might have happened once and it's stayed with you for the last 3 years, and it's a pub story you regurgitate. That's the first thing. So first of all,
And also, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it happens or not. The properties that have been bought up by the landlords are still being used to gouge money out of the poorest in society, right? That's just a simple fact. That just happens regardless whether all of the flats being bought up, or 90% of them, or 85% of them, right? That doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, the artificial scarcity is still being created by the landlord class to try and take money away from the poorest in society. That's simple. That's just what happens. And regardless of that, the interaction between the tenant and the landlord is still one in which the tenant just buys a house for the landlord because they happen to be poorer than them. That's it. That's a simple fact of the matter.
I don't think it always happens. Second of all,
The
I
problem
think
is that this conversation is being done from the perspective of, here's this mythical situation in which this one tower block in Camberwell is being bought out by one investor or something, or a multitude of investors, and then we're thinking around this individual, mythical scenario, rather than actually understanding the nature of the tenant-landlord dynamic and the nature of the commodification of property as an asset. Right? We need to. It's very frustrating because I understand that it's good to use hypotheticals to be able to understand a point, right? But otherwise, the landlord will, well, in this situation it's good, or this situation it's bad, or whatever, rather than understanding the actual structural issues at play within landlording as a concept.
think some areas do have that problem, and some areas are swarmed in on by landlords. But then we raise a bigger question. So is that irritating? Yeah, it sounds horrendous. So what do we do about it? Oh, well, landlords
Get rid of all the landlords. Implement land reform.
shouldn't be able to buy property. All right, but why? Because at the moment, at this time and this place, we generally speaking, although Boris and boys have been trying to change this rapidly, we generally have an open market economy, and people can buy and do what they want to do. And that's generally a good thing. And the problem is,
No, not with the housing market. That's a bad thing. You're saying, well, we have this is how the way it is at the moment. Oh, I can't change that. Well, we literally can. Ho Chi Minh changed it. I mean, he made some mistakes along the way, but he did change it, right?
certain areas or in certain buildings or certain high density areas, Camberwell, I think was your example, that people then go, well, I don't get a look in. So that raises problems. So can we legislate about that? Should we legislate about that? I think that's less clear. I think the other thing,
Yes, we should. It's incredibly clear, and we absolutely should legislate against it. 100%. There you go. Answered your question.
is that we have, and I see this a lot with property, we have learned helplessness. So the most common conversation of learned helplessness I have is this. You've said £80,000 property. Yeah. The average property price in the UK is 250. The average wage for a graduate starting is 22. How is that fair? Well, I will tell you. You're looking at the average UK wage, but you're on not an average. Sorry, start again. You're looking at the average UK property price of, let's say, 250.
Yeah.
You are looking at a starting wage. A starting wage can't look at the average property price. That's too expensive.
Yeah.
And they then come.
That doesn't matter, because regardless, if you're on a low wage, you do not have money to save for a deposit. Right? If you're a member of the precariat, right? You don't have the luxury to be able to go, I'm going to put away X amount of money away each month to be able to afford a deposit on a house in 3 years, 4 years time or whatever. And even then, even regardless of that, that's still 4 years of paying rent to a landlord to pay for their house for them. It all comes back to a complete circular argument. I go, well, if you'd have just, been incredibly lucky like me, then well, no, it doesn't matter, because there's still this interim period in which you are forced to help a landlord pay for a landlord's house for them, for the simple fact that they are richer than you, and that's just immoral. That's nonsense. That shouldn't happen.
Come back and say, but I've got to move away from my friends and my family. Yes. And you always had to. Back in the glorious 80s, when property was £5.50 and we all earned 50p a week, I'm being slightly cynical here.
Sure.
It was pretty difficult then. Now, a different sort of difficult, but difficult for a whole bunch of reasons. So, yeah, I don't think it's perfect at the moment, but I also don't think it's particularly easy to know how we legislate it. And, oh, well, ban landlords is an inane, stupid and childlike argument. Oh, well, people should...
No, it's not. It's not an inane, stupid and childlike argument. Plenty of countries have done it. I know they're dirty communists, so you hate them for being dirty communists, but there's plenty of countries that got rid of landlords and implemented land reform laws. It just shows your ignorance of history, or I guess, or your hatred of communism, that you just don't think that's a good thing to do. I mean, maybe you don't think it's a good thing to do because it might hurt your property portfolio. Oh no, the poor landlord doesn't want to lose out on all of the money that he's gouged from poor people over the years. Oh no, poor landlord, I'm so sad for you. Oh no.
only be able to have one property each. Why? That only suits you at the moment because you don't.
Because it's the use value of a property is something where somebody needs to live. I understand you're a fucking liberal who thinks that everything should be measured by exchange value, but unfortunately, you and I have different standards of what happens when commodities are scarce. It's very, very simple.
Don't have one.
Yeah, I do. So to some extent, I actually buy into that idea. I think there should be a limit to. But then, right, so here's the thing. This is where my logic and my sort of idealism kind of conflict, right? So logically, I think, right, okay, landlords in the UK, you should have a maximum of, I think, 4 residential properties. I'm sort of pulling that figure out of my arse, right? 4 residential, right? What they can be 1-bed flats, they can be 3-bed houses, they can be in the north or the south, in Scotland, whatever. Fine. But then I start thinking, hang on, because my girlfriend works in this arena, I am already privy to the information that actually, against probably most people's expectations, most landlords in the UK actually own like 1, maybe 2 properties. So then it becomes a question of like,
it doesn't make the exploitation any less bad. It makes the scale of the exploitation less bad. True. I will happily give you that the scale of the exploitation is not as bad, but it's still exploitative and no less exploitative than the tenant-landlord relationships of a massive new serial landlord who has 18,000 properties, right? Whatever. Obviously, very few landlords have that many properties, but 18,000 is my go-to big number when I'm thinking on the spot.
Well, look, if the problem that you're trying to solve is the housing crisis and getting people firstly on that ladder, you're not going to fucking solve it by wasting a load of legislative energy and political capital trying to put something like that in, because it's not going to change anything, right?
That won't stop them, however. They love to legislate. The last 5 years, George Osborne started it. Another Conservative Chancellor started this war on landlords, and it's become an ideological war.
Oh, so the war on the landlords. I'm so hard done by with my huge property portfolio. They're trying to make my houses fit for human habitation, and won't let my letting agents charge agency fees, which means I have to put up the first month's deposit. Oh, I'm so hard done by as a poor little landlord. I can't believe that the Conservative government are attacking me to make me, admit at least a tiny bit of human empathy. Oh no, I'm so sad.
Shelter, or shouter, as we all call them, have become part of it, and the whole TikTok landscape, bad landlords. So there's more landlord legislation on the way now.
It's crazy.
Good.
Though, isn't it? Because it's like, so I could imagine them wasting that. I mean, here I am sort of chastising them for wasting the political capital on it, but I could totally imagine them doing it because it's a Tory government, and I imagine that a lot of Tories own property or have friends or wives or husbands who have
26% of Tory MPs are landlords
invested in property, and they would then be in a really comfortable position to say, look, we're going to put this thing in, but don't worry, because it, secretly we all know that most of us only own like 1 or 2 properties, so it's fine. Like, it won't actually impact it, but it'll make us look good in the Guardian.
But then you run another problem because most people's objection to this is, and again I'll share an opinion with you, right? Most people's objection to landlords is couched in terms of it's not fair, it's not the right thing to do, I would never do it, and people just need to get on the ladder. That's most people's the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exploitative. That's why.
The uncomfortable reality for many of us is that many people's objection to landlords is intensely personal and based purely on envy. You've got something and are doing.
Oh yeah, here we go. Politics of envy. There we go. Like bottom of the barrel, level 0 criticisms, right? It's nothing about like the structural nature of a relationship or anything like that, or the any kind of the economic mechanics of landlordism and things. Oh well, you're just jealous of me because I'm rich. I'm like, most of us don't want to be rich. Most of us don't want to be fucking property tycoons. Most of us want to be able to have a house that we own ourselves, that we can live in, and be able to have a nice, sensible, quiet life on our own. We don't all want to be price gouging cunts. It's very, very simple. But unfortunately, that you think that everyone is just like you, and we're all just want to be living the high life with thousands and thousands of pounds of passive income, as you guys call it, right? Like simple. Like I hate that mindset. It's just, the only reason why left always hate me is because I'm envious. I'm like, no, because you do bad things. You create a bad society which has negative utility. It's very, very simple.
Something that I perceive makes you money for no effort whatsoever, and that's not fair. Now you can see exactly the same thing in work from home versus going into a workplace. In fact, I think you've done one of your videos.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a sec.
Yeah, but it's the same envy idea. You've got something I haven't, so what's the solution? Well, the solution for some people is you shouldn't have it because I can't get it. Well, you can't.
Well, no, but the difference is that there is no utility in making people who can work from home not work from home just because it makes people who can't work from home like jealous of that fact, right? Because it's just the nature of the beast in such that some things have to be done on site and some things can not be done on site. That's just the nature of the beast. Whereas there are plenty of alternatives to a world of landlordism, right? There's plenty of things that we could do to change the way property works in this country, to make it fairer on the poor, to make it harder for landlords to be able to exploit, because let's remember it's an exploitative relationship between tenants and landlords, essentially where the rich exploit the poor for money. That's how bear in mind, that's how feudalism works, right? Just because the market is freer doesn't make it any less feudalistic in the way that the property market works in this country, right? It's simple. It's incredibly simple in the way that works, and that's why these two things are different. Because there is no utility in having landlords. When you could get rid of them entirely, have some level of council property, as well as housing associations, as well as housing cooperatives, which work in such a way as to not make sure that the exploitative and extractive nature of landlordism isn't as blight upon society that it is at the moment right now, and that would make life better for everyone, would increase overall net utility with regards to the way in which people house themselves at the moment, right? These are things that we can and could do that makes this analogy, this incredibly stupid analogy that he's made, doesn't make any fucking sense.
You just need to do your life differently. And that's an uncomfortable, and that's going to sound brutally gammon conservative, but actually from an apolitical stance, if you want to be more clever or more switched on or make more money or be thinner or have a more attractive partner or be able to cycle better or be a funny or comedian, this is exactly what you said earlier on, you're going to have to make some changes in your life. And it's going to be really horribly hard. That's just the reality.
But when you're talking about property, that is not an apolitical stance. To say that to be able to say that it's fine to have a society of haves and have-nots, because it must be self-evident that the haves have worked and the have-nots haven't worked, right? Because this is the just world fallacy in action, because he is the haves, right? He has to retroactively justify the exploitation that he engages in by saying, well, I have done things right, or I must have done things right to be in the position I'm in now, and everyone below me must have done things wrong, because otherwise the meritocracy wouldn't function. I'm like, you know why that's happened is because we don't have a meritocracy. Our society is not meritocratic. And, you're in the position that you are because that's just how the cookie crumbles at the end of the day, right? There are actions that people can take. I'm not saying that the people can't take more actions to improve their life. I'm not saying that in the slightest. But it's the nature of the beast of the commodification of housing that we have at the moment and the way the property market functions such that it creates a divisive class which have opposing material interests, right? It's dialectical in nature, the way in which the material interests of landlords and tenants are completely opposed, right? And that's why it creates conflict. We can, as a society, change the structure to ameliorate that conflict and make lives better for people overall by net utility, rather than having a small group of people who extract loads of wealth and labor value from the people who have nothing, right? It's very, very simple.
I think you're right. I think for a lot of people, I think it comes from not necessarily a place of envy purely. I think it comes from a place of immense frustration in that they are looking at property. They're trying to find a place to live, which is just a fundamental need, right? Like it's not something you can dip in and dip out of.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why so many people go into property, right? Because there's always going to be a market for a roof over people's heads.
Is there always going to be a market? Is the demand entirely inelastic because literally no one can cope without having a place to live, right? So that makes it very ideal. The way that the supply is also inelastic because it's very difficult to just build loads of houses because it takes time and resources and energy and the will to do so, which clearly this government has not been doing because they're very happy to not make homes that are affordable to be able to drive the market price down, because why would they? They're all, half of them are fucking investors at this point into the property market. So why would they want to implement policies that drop the market value of the things that they own? Right? It's very that's how that functions at the end of the day.
But they are approaching this problem at a time where we've got booming landlordism, if that's even a word, and also a time
we haven't. Landlordism is waning because of the last 5 years. The legislation, the rules, the tax changes. Councils are so greedy; they're all piling in on what they want to get out of it. And this whole social networking, this social fabric now, it's okay to be really horrendous to landlords. A load of landlords going, do you know what? Sod this. It's
really
not.
Good. I hope it happens to all of them. I hope they all realise that the entirety of the working class in this country think that you're all despicable, repugnant pieces of shit, and you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, and it's better that you don't. It's very, very... That's good. I'm happy that you feel so socially ostracised that you decide to be better people. Brilliant. Fantastic. Music to my ears.
Yes, it's and I actually made a video on this. It's like, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
You don't want landlords to think this through. You don't want landlords. You go on Shelter and you moan to them. You talk to your MP and you come on TikTok and you shoot your mouth off. And all this is happening. And meanwhile, all the tax rules and the councils are getting on it. Their hands open. We want a bit more money, please.
Yeah.
And increasingly, landlords have gone, do you know what? I just don't need the hassle anymore. Or I'm going to switch to Airbnb, or I'm going to sell this. I'm going to cash out. And what you've now got is reduced numbers of landlords. And because you've got reduced numbers of landlords, some of those will go to other landlords' properties, but some of them will go to people to live there. Now, what do you think happens then? It means you've got less rentable property. Well, let's go to...
But the people who have bought the house are not seeking rental property anymore. It's one in, one out. The market of both supply and demand have dropped identically. It will not change the ratio of supply to demand because the people have become owner-occupiers rather than renters.
To a classic, it's supply and demand. There's less property to rent. So guess what? The prices go up.
So,
and I hate to say to those people, but you did that.
Yeah. So I
mean, maybe the prices will go up if these people switch to Airbnb, but that just makes them even more repugnant human beings because Airbnb is even worse, right? Airbnb is an even worse blight than landlordism. You don't even give somewhere a place to live. You're using it for incredibly short-term gains because you want to make money off. You want to make a quick buck rather than just like a slow buck off of being a buy-to-let rental landlord. Like, it's even worse. I mean, if we're going to implement legislation that makes landlords worse off, we should absolutely do the same to Airbnb people because they're both, they're both two shades of the same shit.
Understand that, but like the sort of, I guess the point I was going to get to was that if you've got let's say a culture of landlords or landlordism until now, you say that it's gone down, or that people are sort of bailing out of it. I'd be interested to see what they're going into. Are they jumping into crypto? They're like, fuck this.
I think Airbnb's been a big one. I mean, it's a colleague of mine I've known for a long time, and he started moving into Airbnb, and as he's moved into Airbnb, and financially that's considerably better. And of course, we've got less people flying or moving or traveling abroad because the airports are so fucked.
Yeah.
But what he's found, of course, is that his local council's going, we want a license for that.
Yeah.
So
good. Well done, those based councils.
Yeah, and I understand why that's got to happen.
But
I've got some sympathy for some of that.
But it's also to do with the absence of things like 100% mortgages. So like we were talking about like back in the 80s a second ago, right? You're right. Like it's never been super easy to get on the ladder, right? You've always had to either save up a deposit or take your risk with 100% mortgage, and for a long time they've failed to build an adequate number of houses. So that's not new. But what is new is that we're now sort of, if you imagine a crescendo of failure of house building, we're now at this, like this sort of peak where the cost of a house is what, like, you could probably quote the figures back to me, but it's something ridiculous. Like the average UK house, like to buy a house is something like 10 or 11 times the average UK salary, right? But you can only borrow up to like 4.5, 5 times your salary.
You can borrow a bit more than that, and I think it's about 9.5 times. But yeah, I think those are the figures. But there are usually other deals you can find. But yeah, it's
out of reach, right?
Yeah,
for a lot of people, unless there's family money, and most people out there don't have family money.
No, right.
And the decision makers that decide on this stuff, or that decide what legislation gets put into the Queen's speech that year, or whatever, do have family money. And so there's this expectation that they're out of touch, or there's this attitude that they're out of touch, and that nothing's changing, nothing's improving. And because the traditional mechanism that they would have would be to just roll the dice on a 100% mortgage, fuck it, I'm in the southeast, like, this is how my mum got on the ladder. She got 100% mortgage, bought the cheapest 3-bed house on the shittiest council estate in Maidenhead. And because you will know this, that the general trend, even if there is a recession, is that the value of property tends to go up. It will recover. She made money, and
over time it will generally double every 10 years.
Yeah. So
they used to say every 7 years, but if you work on your property doubling in value every 10 years now, it's a bit like a fruit machine. So it's not like every 10 years your property will be double.
Yeah.
It's a lot more like over 500 years. If you work it out, it's doubled every 10 years. That's generally
at time of recording.
A bit of a guideline people use.
But because now there's insufficient stock of new houses, and because you can't get 100% mortgage,
right,
and because the legislators don't come from the same socioeconomic background as people like, I was about to say people like me, but I am on the ladder, so I'm probably out the window on this one. There is this feeling of frustration. And then I think when you inject landlords into the mix, and these people look at their pay slips and they're like, I earned, let's say, £2,000 last month, and fucking half of it went on a flat that I could have saved half of that money if I just bought it. Like, what am I paying for? So I totally understand the anger out there, but I also get where you're coming from, and indeed where my girlfriend comes from, where they're like, landlords provide a function, not everyone can buy, some people do want to rent.
They do not provide any function at all. They're litter, they're waste. They're a pointless middleman. There's no need for them.
But I don't know. I don't know what the solution is to it. Like, what do you think we should do?
You can go back to 1979-80 with Margaret Thatcher and the right to buy, and of course there are still some rabid lefties who go, "Bloody Thatcher, right to buy." Well, hang on, yeah, that's 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and to be honest, you did have 12 years in the middle where you might have reversed that. If you go,
but they didn't. No, Labour built fewer council houses than Margaret Thatcher, right? That's the case. They didn't fix the problem at all. They made it even worse. They made it completely worse. And just because it was 50 years ago doesn't mean that made the housing stock any better. We're still, the gap between the people in private rental and the people in council rental is still growing. That gap is still getting wider and wider. You're saying, oh, it's 50 years ago. Why don't you get over it? It's like saying, why didn't you just get over the NHS and we'll privatise it? No, fuck off. Just because it was a long time ago. It's less economic effects now. Like in the same way that, people who were born into families in the United States who couldn't get on the property ladder because, they were black. That still has a massive effect now. That's why there's a huge, wealth disparity between black and white people in America. Because white people got access to government-backed mortgages, in the turn of the century, but the black people just didn't get access to. And there's incredible wealth disparity, and that's a century's worth of knock-on effect. Just because, that was in the 50s, so it shouldn't matter now. That's nonsense reasoning. Give me a reason why that makes any difference, that the gap is that wide, right? Because that is an essential way in which the housing market was changed by Thatcher, and that issue was compounded over time. If anything, the gap in time between then and now, in which the issue hasn't been solved, has only made it worse rather than any less relevant.
Go back to World War II, this country, no matter what brand of politics you favour, what side of the house you sit, this country's never built enough properties. So right now, this country needs to build about 3.
It certainly built a lot of properties in the kind of the slum clearance, council house boom in the post-war period, right? That was definitely a thing that happened. I mean, it's certainly, not as many houses as could have been built, and it's definitely way more houses than ever built now. Maybe it wasn't enough houses, but it certainly shows that they should be building more, and it should be done by the public sector. That's a very simple thing that we could do, but landlords don't like that because we'll reduce my property value. Oh no, basically, it's the only reason why we can't do it at this point. I mean, not even just landlords, any kind of property investor, and NIMBYs as well. People who own their own property are incredibly excited to watch their asset wealth accrue. So, well, you can't build houses near my house because then my property might drop by a certain small percent below inflation. I'm like, I couldn't give a shit. I'm a homeowner myself. I just do not care if I gain any asset wealth. The only reason I wanted to get on the property ladder was to get out of the hands of fuckers like this cunt taking my money for nothing as a renter. That's the only reason why I did it. And if this drops in value, I don't care, because at the end of it, I will have paid it off and I'll have a house that I can live in. And that's all I really care about.
1,000 properties a year.
Yeah.
Just to keep up with demand.
Yeah.
Right? 300,000 a year. Well, I think in something like 2007, 2008, so that would have been Blair, I think they hit like 220.
Yeah.
And that was the closest we've ever got in 100 years or 80 years, right? One year in the middle of Blair. Of course, you then get into it if you want to talk politics. So, okay, Thatcher did the right to buy. A lot of people like the right to buy. I think it fundamentally changed the UK, changed the way we work. But
hang on a minute. Beforehand, you were saying, "Oh, it's 50 years to go, so it doesn't matter," and now you're saying, "Oh, well, this completely changed the way in which property." Which way is it? What is it? Is it not relevant because it was a long time ago, or is it incredibly relevant because it's massively changed the landscape of the property market in the UK? You can't have it both ways, Graham.
None of them at the time thought, well, hang on, this is going to cause some problems later on because we still need social housing. And the reality is, the uncomfortable reality, again, for no matter what political thing you're interested in, Thatcher's team never came up with a solution. Mayor John Major was in for, 6-7 years. He never came up with a solution. Blair and Brown, 12 years, never came up with a solution. And we're now back on the right, and 12 years, no one's come up with a solution. No one has fixed it. And is that because they've come from a silver spoon background? Possible. I don't think that's the reason. I do think at the moment the current Conservative government, I think they have a massive issue with perception and intention. And I think that
there's a very, very simple reason, and it's to do with right to buy, and that right to buy flooded the market with cheap property during the 80s, and the generation that were alive and were in the property, purchasing capacity at that time, who were living probably in the social housing there too, or were a beneficiary of someone who bought their house by right to buy and then put it into the general market to be able to buy a better house for themselves, right? That all these people who were the beneficiaries of an economic kind of public sector sell-off during the 80s, these are all boomers, and these people are all of the people who have these people are the biggest voting cohort in the country. The boomers have a massive sway over the political sphere, so neither party can ever do anything that angers this particular demographic of property-owning boomers who want to see their assets increase over time, because they're all NIMBYs now, right? Since they got gifted property during the 80s by this kind of dip in housing prices due to right to buy or whatever, or dip in the availability of houses available for purchase. It makes no odds either way. These are now a voter bloc that you cannot not pander to. And Blair did it, Cameron did it, May did it, Johnson did it, Major did it, Brown did it. The only person not to do so, and Miliband did too, the only person not to kind of, kowtow to this voter base is Jeremy Corbyn, right? He tried to energise like a non-voters into the fold, which is a different strategy altogether. But you can even see it now with Keith Starmer at the moment, where he's doing all the nonsense patriotism. Let's crack down on crime and crack down on drug use, which is political patter that's designed to be able to win over this mythical Middle Englander swing voter property owner, right? That is why none of them have solved it, because they can't win they can't win an election whilst doing so, because there's an incredibly entrenched property-owning boomer class who don't want to give that up to make life better for the next generation, and it's created incredible generational resentment, and as well it should.
Their perception is shocking. I don't think they have nailed it at all, and I think it's very, very hard, certainly if you come from the sort of the left of politics, to see them as anything other than the kinds of things they get called. I think it's really hard for any of them to argue anything better. And I think the worst thing is they look so clueless in any kind of interview, and you're thinking, you've been briefed, right? You've got like a box of stuff with even the questions they're likely to ask you. Why aren't you? Yeah, I think I'm coming across, whether or not you agree with me or disagree, but I think I'm coming across as reasonably well informed on this conversation so far.
Sure.
Why aren't I seeing that in people who are professional talkers?
Well, I suppose
he does have a head like a Funko Pop. That is true. That's true. And he's also wearing a Hawaiian shirt at that age. I'm just like, should you really? I know it's rude of me to critique someone's appearance or choice of clothes. You look at me, I can't fucking talk, right? But Hawaiian shirt, mate. You're literally filming for a professional podcast here. Why have you decided to wear a Hawaiian shirt? Please explain to me why this was a thing you thought worth doing.
Suppose, again, sort of speaking, coming from a left perspective, my sense is that these are people who have, not all of them, But certainly with your Boris Johnsons, your Jacob Rees-Moggs,
Yes.
people who have come up through that silver spoon route, they have failed upwards. They've never really been disciplined or had to deal with the output of failure. They've been rewarded for it, conversely. And so for them to then sit and actually study and brief and be across their brief for something and to feel the repercussions of that is just something for the little people. You know, that's how it feels. I see how poorly they perform and I just go, oh my fucking Christ, like, these are the people that are leading us, really? Is this the best we can do?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think you can look back, depending on your age and interest in politics, you can look back and you can see big sections of, oh my goodness, that was bad. And it always fascinates me. I mean, if I can kind of cross the floor briefly, it always fascinates me when you see like people who are very proudly left who will come in and take some displeasure at me talking about property or talking about money or something, or you know, first of all they'll go, "You're trying to sell a course." Well, no, I'm not actually, but never mind. And then we'll start off with, well, there's this that's wrong and there's this that's wrong and something else. You kind of go, well, okay, what's the alternative? Well, Jeremy Corbyn was the alternative. Yeah, but they didn't vote him in, did they? And then it's like there's always a reason why. Well, yeah, it was agitators. It was hidden elite. It was okay. Well, why don't you take a leaf out of Tony Blair, because you know Tony Blair was a vote machine. He won 3 in a row. Even by his third one, he absolutely
because he didn't fundamentally change anything. The Sun were in his back pocket, right? Murdoch wanted him to win. It's crazy how the Sun and all of the Murdoch papers will back Tony Blair to win, which he did, right? And then as soon as Jeremy Corbyn comes along, who actually threatens the bottom line of the media oligopoly, right? He threatens the interests of capital, and suddenly every single paper is smear campaign, smear campaign, smear campaign, which you cannot deny is true, because there are literally studies showing the amount of negative coverage Corbyn got across every single paper, including The Guardian, published more negative articles than positive ones about Jeremy Corbyn at the time, right? If anybody who spends, you know, a little bit of time reading basic stuff like the propaganda model by Chomsky, right, they will understand the way in which this works, because it's not in their interest. Anyone who threatens the bottom line of capital, which is, you know, the media are a part of, right? Like the media in our country is owned by Rupert Murdoch, Viscount Rothermere, and the Barclay brothers. The vast majority of it, they own 73%, right? Any politician that came along like Jeremy Corbyn, who said to these people, we will take your shares and we'll give them to the workers, because those are the people who built your company up, right? Those are the people who your company would not exist without, as part of the inclusive ownership fund. They go, well, that will take away shares from us. They'll take away the value from our company that we want. So we will demonize this man who doesn't get elected. It's very, very simple. There was lie after lie after lie after lie. Things were completely fabricated. The Daily Mail published a piece of speculative fiction about how Jeremy Corbyn would destroy Britain or whatever. And as I said previously, Blair spent his entire time pandering to people like this fucker, because he refused to change the way in which property functioned in this country, because he knew that it would piss off the voter base, right? This is not a thing that's going to be fixed by parliamentary democracy, at least not at the current time as well, until the boomers actually literally die off, because it's entirely entrenched in the political system to have a huge cohort of voters who cannot ever see their property price decrease and will vote against anybody who does.
He smashed the Conservatives. And then the response is always, oh yeah, he's not a proper Labour guy. Well, maybe you need not a proper Labour guy if you want to have another chance then, because he smashed it.
Well, that's the argument with Starmerism, for want of a better word, isn't it? It's like, so I always, whenever people criticize Starmer or accuse me of being some sort of Starmer fanboy, I'm always like, no, don't get it twisted. I don't think he's Jesus. I certainly don't worship him in the way that some people worshipped Corbyn. I'm not into hero worship, frankly, when it's politics.
We weren't worshipping Corbyn. We just wanted a guy who actually stood for, you know, the transformational policy platform that would make our lives materially better off. Again, it's always I hate the way that politics just turns into team sports and, as he says, hero worship, right? It's like, well, you must only like this person because they are the cool, you know, magic grandpa type thing. It's like, no, I would just like to have an economy that works for everybody equally, right? I would like to be able to put my effort and my work and my labour into a company to then get paid dividends because I actually have shares within that company, despite it being a very, very large company. I would like to be able to get onto the property ladder or live in a council property because I want to be able to not have to pay extortionate rents to private landlords. I would really, really like to be able to get together with friends of mine who are also unemployed, should I be unemployed at the time, and then be able to take out a lump sum of benefits to start a worker cooperative so that we have a joint venture that we can work towards, as a collective to be able to make our lives better outside of unemployment, right? I would like to be able to do all these things. I'd like to be able to insulate every home in the country. I'd like to be able to plant additional trees to help with climate change. I would like to be able to change our economy so that we actually rely on renewable energy sources rather than continuing to pump endless greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, because a government who is entrenched in the fossil fuel lobby doesn't want to change the dynamics of the energy production in this country. I would like all of those things to happen, but unfortunately we can't do that because it's against the interests of both the media class, who decide what the political discourse is, and it's also against the material interests of the largest voter base, who are the people who have diametrically opposed material interests to me. It's not a complex proposal I'm saying here,
unless it's Emily Thornberry, who is fucking amazing. But when it comes to Starmer, I'm like, no. Like, the idea is, I will support him because he's leader of the opposition. Let's get him into power, and then once you're in power, once you're actually in a position to affect change, then you form lobby groups in the way that, let's say, the ERG have in the Conservative Party. You lobby for the change that you actually want to see, and maybe he won't do the thing that you want him to do, but you've got fucking an infinitely greater chance of having that conversation and having that form some sort of bill that then gets discussed and debated than just sitting here on the sidelines and fucking complaining about shit that ended like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Grow the fuck up.
We can't do anything about it because we keep getting kicked out of the fucking Labour Party for being too left wing. Like, obviously, all of us hate Starmer's platform. We think his platform's nonsense. But if you offered like a couple of policy concessions, we'd probably just say, yeah, that's fair enough. You ran on a platform of having this policy platform and we voted for you, so we'd like to continue to support you moving forward, right? None of that's happened. None of the policies have been followed. He's scrapped every single fucking pledge, and now he's trying to kick people who have ideological disagreements with him out of the party completely, right? And he's happy to back policies that are completely antithetical to the values of the party that we're a part of, right? If you want to be a fucking liberal, join the Lib Dems. Like, that's a different car as far as I'm concerned. If the British electorate wants to vote for a Lib Dem, then that's fine. Whatever. I couldn't give a shit at this point. But quite frankly, if you want to be a member of the Labour, if you want to be the leader of the Labour Party, you should have at least something that even closely represents Labour values at that point, right?
Up. So it's like there's a real element of frustration there where it's like,
I can see that.
It's I've got to, maybe I'll have to watch my tone here a little bit, Greg.
Yeah, 100% sensibility. You're absolutely correct. He shouldn't have backed the people's vote, and he should have been hard. He should have mandatory reselection, all of that stuff. He should have gone really hard and then properly like cooed the centrists. Because looking back, retrospectively, they did this. They would say, well, surely they wouldn't do the same to us. Well, yeah, they did. They did do the same. They did do that to us. So retrospectively, we can look back and say, well, no, maybe we should have properly purged the centrists because. They did, they did not show us the same courtesy.
Because I'm going to get myself in trouble again. But
With whom?
Well, this is it. Like, this is one of my bugbears. Is on the right, people tend to sort of coalesce and support whoever the prime minister or leader of the Conservative Party is at that moment. On the left, the vote gets split between sort of Puritans and realists. in my view,
I think there's certainly a truth of kind of not proper Labour. Okay, not if proper Labour is what I think you're identifying proper Labour as. It's possible, and I mean this very, very gently. It's possible the country has changed since proper Labour.
Well, proper Labour is basic social democracy. The fact that people act like Jeremy Corbyn was just like some kind of new Bolshevik is just fucking insane to me. It's like, oh, he's gonna turn the UK into communism. I can't do no communism, please. But it's just like here's some incredibly like common sense social democratic reform to turn our country, make our country a bit fairer. I was like, anything to the left of neoliberalism at this point is just treated like it's fucking Trotsky, and it just does my fucking head in, right? Nothing in the Corbyn manifesto is in any way socialist, apart from maybe the inclusive ownership fund, right? There was nothing inclusive ownership fund rather. Nothing was socialist. It was all just kind of social democracy, like complete milquetoast social democracy. Let's have some inelastic markets under state control. Thank you for the follow, Sensibilium. I appreciate it. Welcome to the No Justice stream. Like, this wasn't a radical platform that Jeremy Corbyn was proposing, and they act like he's fucking, they act like he is literally the reincarnation of Ho Chi Minh. Like, come on. It's like the country hasn't shifted. He's trying to say, oh, the country's shifting the policy proposals that they want. 70% back renationalisation, right? more than 50% back additional public housing, more than 50% back an increase in minimum wage. These are all things that people are widely and completely in favour of. You can't think then, well, hang on, if all this policy platform is something that speaks to people on a fundamental level and they all support this policy platform, what other factors could have come into people voting against Jeremy Corbyn? It may well be his foreign policy takes, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But you cannot say that none of it was to do with media bias and the public persona that was generated by the media, right? You cannot say that it wasn't, because the evidence is there. The studies have been done. We know how biased the media was on both sides of the aisle, both right and the growny-ad lefty types, right? They all published nothing but negative press about Jeremy Corbyn, or at least more negative than positive, or not even neutral. Like, the Daily Mail published more negative things than they did neutral things, right? That's how partisan their media outlet is. The most viewed news website in the country being dailymail.co.uk. What else were people going to think? You've got to think there must be something else other than people didn't want to support the Corbyn platform, because all of the polls show, when you look at individual issues, they do support these particular policy proposals, right?
Was first around, and those glory days of what you consider to be glory, proper Labour, I'm not totally sure that's representative of the country anymore. Not totally clear that's what actually people want or need right now.
Do you know what's fascinating though, Graham? Is like, so I understand why they would look at somebody like Starmer, Thornberry, Cooper, and say like, that's not proper Labour. They are Tory.
I mean, Thornberry's a different beast, right? I think at the end of the day, Thornberry is mostly just a pragmatist who will support good policy that puts Labour into power, right? I don't really have too many issues with Thornberry, right? She was supportive of Jeremy Corbyn at the time. I like her public persona. She's pretty no-nonsense. I quite like her, right? She's too like Ramona-y as far as I'm concerned. Like, I'm not huge on her, like, the Brexit talking points that she has, but I think her heart's in the right place. Whereas Yvette Cooper was the one swanning around with fucking controls and immigration mug. She was the one who started doing who introduced the idea of disability assessments, right? Like, these people are just fucking neoliberal shitheads. Like, I don't give a shit about them.
Light, they're in nice suits, they're cozy with business. I want a working class northern lad who knows what it's like. That, I get that, but what I don't understand is why those same people then vote Tory and go like, yeah, I don't like Starmer, he's not real Labour, but I will vote for this like narcissistic, sociopathic, 180,000 person killing, like.
I mean, I think there's an idea of authenticity in that Boris is authentic because he's a public school like lout, and he acts like one. Whereas Starmer is trying to tell you that he's on the side of the working class when he's just a fucking QC. At the end of the day, his father was a toolmaker, so it doesn't seem sincere at all. Like, if someone like Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner were in charge of the Labour Party, it would feel a lot more honest, wouldn't it?
Corrupt, incompetent, cheated, like oh my god, it's like, why would you go for? Is it sort of a better the devil you know thing? Like, well, at least this guy, we know he's an asshole,
I don't know. I mean, I got essentially moving into your stand-up, so I was just watching. Was there a question there?
Yeah. Well, I'm just rhetorically asking / ranting. Yeah.
You're venting. You feeling any better?
Not really. No, never.
Listen, I've got to bring this to a close. I'm so sorry.
Cool. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Graham Davids.
Thank you. It's been brilliant. Lovely talking to you, Abe. Cheers.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
That was Graham Davids. Ladies and gents, once again, thank you so much for joining me for A Thompson and Other Disappointments. A bit of an abrupt ending there by Graham, but do you know what? I will forgive him because he's such a charming, lovely guy.
He puts a really nice face on his parasitism. He's such a nice parasite. It makes me forget about all the money that he's taken from poor people by hoarding scarce resources. Once you have a chat with him, you realise, it's just a normal guy. And to be fair, that's true. A lot of landlords are just normal guys at the end of the day, or normal girls, I guess. It's a really weird dichotomy, but whatever. Like, there's normal people who've been told through the advances in liberal capitalism is that engaging in this rent-seeking, destructive, socially destroying industry is fine. We've been taught through the way in which the base affects a superstructure, in that things are measured by their exchange value and not their use value. This is just how people understand the world now. And I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm saying he's done bad things. Like, people, just as he was saying during the segment, right? It was like saying, people insult me and they abuse me by calling me a parasite. I'm like, well, they may be abusing him. You may find it insulting, but that doesn't change the fact that that's literally true. What you're engaging is literal parasitism. That's what being a landlord is. You are a parasite who extracts something from a renter where you gain something and they gain nothing, right? Like, it's is the simple fact of the matter at the end of the day. My God, Graham, if you're watching, if you want to debate me on this, if you want to debate me on the ethics of landlordism, fucking you get right in my DMs right now, 'cause I will debate the shit out of this with you, Graham. You get on right now. I will absolutely do it. Let's go. Let's fucking 1v1 me, but not IRL, because I don't want to leave the house. And if you're watching in future YouTube viewers, please like, comment, and subscribe. Please do click the bell, because that will notify you when I do go live. It'll also notify when I post new videos. If you click on my name, it'll see more videos to watch. And then also link to my Twitch, which is where I stream, as well as streaming on YouTube. But if you click that Twitch and follow there, that'd be great as well as all my rest of my social medias. And thank you very much, YouTube viewers, and I'll see you on the next one. You take care.